Hi, I'm Tom Burgess and welcome to the Weekly Wake Up, the show which is part of the Real Agenda network of podcasts for political change. Now today we're going to be talking about how single-use plastic is no longer fantastic and how it contributes to inequality. And also we're going to be talking about how can big business be a force for good and really help to reduce poverty. And if you want to find out more about the Real Agenda, go to our website, realagendaradio.org. Now, we've got a busy show today. We've got 5 folk in the studio this week, but we do have a new microphone. We've also got plenty of biscuits, as I picked up my favourites from Costco last week, but I don't want anyone crunching while we're recording. Is that okay?
I try not to.
Thank you, Satya. You enjoyed your biscuits today?
Oh, really lovely. Needed it.
Anyway, the plan on this show is that each member of the team will introduce a topical news event which is related to the Real Agenda. So that's inequality, low incomes, unaffordable housing, education, health, infrastructure, repairing our damaged democracy. And we'll talk about these topics with a particular focus on how these issues can be fixed. So this is not question time, but it's answer time. So let's first introduce the team. Now we've got Oliver, our man in the city. But how are things in the square mile, or rather, from our international perspective of this programme, the 2.6 square kilometres, Oliver? What's been going on?
Not a lot, really, from my perspective. No, that's not true. Quite a lot has been going on.
So what are you going to talk about today?
Well, today I'm going to be talking about, actually pose a question around whether companies can be a force for good. Given the last, 10 or so years, most people have been talking about how bad capitalism is for our society. I want to see if there's actually two sides to the coin, and if we can find solutions for that. Okay, thanks very much.
And we've got Satya. How are you doing today, Satya? What are you going to highlight for us this week?
I'm looking at this report by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and it's called We Can Solve Poverty in the UK. And what they've done is put out a strategy for governments, business, communities and citizens to all work together to solve this problem. And I think it really feeds in well to what Oliver's going to talk about in terms of business. So we'll be discussing that a bit later.
Okay, that was great, Satya. Thanks very much. And now over to Hugh, our rugby international, who hasn't cruised here on his bicycle this week, so he's not got his helmet on. Hugh, what's your topic today then?
Well, first of all, Tom, I'm a next international. I mean, let's not go there. This week, I'm going to be talking about the BBC documentary called War on Plastics.
And we've got Julien, who's joined us today. So welcome, Julien. Great to have you here. So tell us a bit about yourself.
All right. So Julien, I am particularly interested into ecological transition and how we can make it happen while maintaining social equilibrium and order as well.
Okay, that's great. But before we get into the main chat, I'll just give you an update of what's been going on with the Real Agenda in the last week. An episode of the Real Agenda went out on Wednesday called Inequality, It Hurts Us All, and it featured Evander Verforska, the Executive Director of the Equality Trust, who was also speaking in Geneva last week at the launch of the embarrassing and sad report called Poverty in the UK, Human Rights Under Threat, with Philip Alston, the United Nations Special Rapporteur. We've lined up 3 interviews which will be turning into episodes which will be coming out over the next month. First up was Henry Leveson Gower, who's the founder of Promoting Economic Pluralism and also of Mint magazine. So we talked about thinking differently about economics. Then was Simon Reed Henry from the University of London, although he lives in Oslo, talking about how our damaged democracy is further fueling inequality. He's written a new book called Empire of Democracy.
What was one key thing that he said then?
I don't know. I haven't read the book. I did interview him, Satya, and you sprung that on me. I'm not thinking about his interview. You have to listen to the recording. The main thing is because of the way democracy is broken in this country and other countries, it does mean that the rich and powerful are remaining rich and powerful, and those that aren't are not making any progress.
That sounds interesting. I'll get the book.
Well, you can indeed. He didn't have one when I was there. He'd only just arrived and he hadn't been to his office to pick up, because it only just came out, the day we were talking, so maybe we'll catch up with that. Finally, in the last week, we spoke with Richard Murphy. He's a very active tax justice campaigner, and he's co-founder of the Green New Deal Group. He's a prolific blogger and author of The Joy of Tax and a chartered accountant. He'll be featured in an episode coming up in the next month.
The joy of tax. Is that an oxymoron, do you think?
No, it's definitely a joy, and how it was a very good thing to contribute tax. I mean, one of the problems is where some people are being asked to pay tax and they can't afford it, and some people are not being asked to pay taxes and they could afford it. So
it's a joy for some people, not for others.
You can listen to that on The Real Agenda coming out in the next month.
Well, it's a joy when the taxes are used with good intention and for greater purpose.
You're absolutely right there. And also, I was talking about tax justice. I was at a Tax Justice Network conference this week, which was a bit technical, but good to see so many people from across the world doing great work to bring justice and reform our tax system. And before I pass you over to the rest of the team, there was a thing on the BBC called Young and Mega Rich and demanding to pay more tax. And it was about members of America's richest families telling the BBC why paying more tax is their moral duty. And there was much talk of this at the Tax Justice Network conference. And also Vanda talks about this in the latest episode of The Real Agenda, which went out on Wednesday. We'll be looking further in other episodes of how the rich and powerful would actually like to pay more taxes.
In the US, they don't pay very much tax, do they?
The thing in the US, they don't pay for healthcare is separate, and that's a large chunk of money. You can be paying $1,000, $2,000 a month for healthcare, and that's why a lot of people haven't got access to healthcare because they can't afford it. And it depends what taxes. You know, some states have no sales tax, some states have high sales tax, some states don't have a state income tax, and so on. So it varies from state to state.
And in the US as well, the taxes is based on nationality, so there is no way escaping it by going and live abroad. If you are an American citizen, you will pay your taxes.
Everywhere, that's right. It applies to wherever you are in the world because they spend so much of it on defence. And they do spend something on healthcare, actually. The federal government spends more per head on healthcare than the UK, but it only funds veterans and Medicare and Medicaid, which are the programs for the over 65s and also those that are really hard up. So actually they're paying out more. And why is it so much more? Because it's a for-profit system and there's a high cost of, the profit hospitals and also the medications and so on.
That's why we don't want that system here.
We absolutely don't know. We must congratulate our National Health Service, and most Western nations have worked out that they can have a National Health Service, and it seems to slip the minds of most Americans. That's enough of me talking.
Enough about America.
And that, exactly. Let's get back to Europe. Hugh, you're going to raise a particular topic with us. Off you go.
My topic really is around a BBC documentary that I saw last week. It's absolutely incredible when you think of the amount of plastic that we use every day. So this BBC documentary, it's called War on Plastic with Hugh and Anita. I had to watch it because this guy was called Hugh. And I thought, well, what do I have in common with this guy? Turns out not a lot. I use way too much plastic, and you don't really realise it until it's shown to you. I mean, one thing that's absolutely shocking, I don't know if you guys do this, recycling. Do you guys recycle at all?
Of course we do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really try hard to recycle.
Good. The big question is how you recycle and what happens to all the plastic and all the recycling materials that you send off. So in this documentary, they look at what happens to all these plastics. Why do we have so much plastic entering our ecosystem? One of the big things that really shocked me was when Hugh went and looked at all the plastics that we export around the world. Country where we have the biggest export to is Malaysia, 365 million tons of plastic. And in this documentary, at one point, Hugh goes to Malaysia, finds a plastic bag, so a recycling plastic bag from one of the councils in Wales, saying they're the best at recycling. He goes to the plant and they tell him straight off everything in this plant gets recycled. And he comes back with a plastic bag found in Malaysia from this Welsh council. And it just goes to show you, what aren't we being told here? What is the real agenda?
Just on that point, I mean, we know it's a very important issue. Plastics has really moved up the agenda. Our friend David Attenborough at Glastonbury, I wasn't there, but I heard it was a good show. How does this directly relate to sort of inequality issues and what we talk about on the real agenda?
Well, it takes a lot to be able to recycle properly. Our society isn't geared up. You go to supermarkets and thinking about all the plastics that I bring back home and I have to recycle, it really is starting to get to me.
Let's bring Julien in, because you've got a few points you want to talk about on this.
Yeah, so before relating to inequality, I just want to point some research that has been done in the last few months just to show the extent of the damage regarding plastic pollution. A couple of months ago, we managed to break the record of deep diving with a submarine. So we went at the bottom of the ocean. I don't remember how deep it was, but a place we've never been before. And the submarine turned on the light and took a picture, and he took a picture of a plastic bag. So there is plastic in places we don't even reach. Right now, it's how far it goes. Another study that has been done by and published in Nature and Geoscience in April 2019. So it's scientists that went in the Pyrenees in the south of France at 1,500 meters of altitude, and they wanted to analyze the rainwater. This place where they've been is 5 kilometers away from the closest town and 120 kilometers away from a mid-sized city, which is named Toulouse, so quite isolated. They analyzed the content of the rainwater and they discovered that there were plastic inside the rainwater. So we reached a point where it's literally raining plastic in mountain in France, so you can only imagine what is raining down our head in London. Que Choisir, which is an organization that is protecting consumer, did an analysis on seafood in supermarkets, and they discovered that there is plastic in 70% of them, and we are ingesting those microparticles of plastic. Corroborate that as well. There is the American Chemical Society and another study from WWF estimates the amount of plastics that we eat to be 5 grams per week, which is the equivalent of a credit card. So we are literally eating 1 credit card per week. And it's a new thing, so we don't know where it will bring us. We don't know what will be the impact on the health in 20, 30, 35 years. And that is where I relate it to inequality. Because you have two parallel stuff. An increasing pollution that may have an effect on people, and on other side, we are dismantling our public healthcare system. So when health issue will occur in the future, and it's likely that there will, because I don't think that eating 5 grams of plastic per week is harmless. People with good salary, people with great salary, the middle class will be able to have a private insurance to compensate for the degradation of the public one, and will be able to have treatment and treated for their disease. But poor people will only have the minimum. And strangely, the poor people are not the one who pollute the most, so it's extremely unfair.
Julien, do you think there's more plastic in cheaper foods, for example? So processed foods and things like that?
I would not like to say yes or no because I never read anything related to that, but there is the example of Lewisham in London that is not one of the richest area and is the most polluted area because there is this big highway. And a couple of weeks ago, I think it's Extinction Rebellion that got famous a couple of months back in London. They blocked this main road in Lewisham to highlight the fact that this is one of the most polluted place in London. I never read anything about that, but I think it's likely if an area get more populated, it is an area where people with decent revenue will go away and they will move, and the ones that will stay will be the poor ones. So even if I haven't read anything about it, it seems likely that it could happen.
So poorer people are more affected by all of this than richer people, for example.
I don't know if it's the case, but let's say demographic dynamic, this is the way it will be. If you have the money to go away from a polluted place, and the level of pollution means more plastic, you will do it. But if you don't, you will get stuck. And we're reaching this kind of dystopian universe when you read the science fiction from the 60s, where you have the city center full of the middle class and the high class, surrounded by a wall, and the poor are living in terrible condition, like a Blade Runner style. And so I think it's something that people saw coming in the 60s, and we are maybe reaching this dystopian universe quicker than we thought. So we externalize our pollution by sending plastic into Malaysia, which is a poorer country than us, and their consumption of plastic is probably lower than us. And we are actually doing that with every kind of pollution. We do that with nuclear waste. We are doing that with electronic waste that we are sending into Ghana, and we are polluting soil over there. I think that, ultimately, the poor will pay the bill of our pollution.
Yeah, I mean, I get absolutely shocked by the amount of packaging there is on things that actually we don't even need packaging for. Just there's layers and layers and layers of plastic packaging. It's like, why? Why are we doing it?
Okay.
It's a huge issue.
I guess my question is, what do we do about it? Because I think what it brings up actually is, take diesel cars, for instance. Years ago, the government were pushing for people to buy diesel cars. Now they're backtracking. And so for me, the plastic is about, giving people as much information as possible, or whose role is that? And so it's how far they go. So for diesel cars, for instance, what are people to do, for instance? They hear something a few years ago about diesel cars being better, but now they've got more information, which is contradictory to what they've been told. But for me, it's about, do we need more government regulation to get companies to be more transparent about what goes into making goods, for instance? If you take Pret a Manger, for instance, the case that happened, that young girl that was killed as a result of the label not being clear about what she was allergic to. To me, it's all about regulation and how much government involvement there should be to force companies to be more transparent.
Well, it's guidelines and incentives, I mean, and where necessary regulation, but we need some guidance on that, because the free market isn't delivering.
One of the big items that they also talked about in the documentary was wet wipes, and how ridiculous this consumption of wet wipes.
They're brilliant, though. Sorry, I have to say, they're absolutely amazing, wet wipes. They're the best thing that's transformed our lives. Even if you don't have babies, they are so good. I'm sorry. Kill me.
But they are really bad for the environment.
Okay, so I tend to agree with you. They are brilliant. I clean my floors with wet wipes. Sorry. I used to clean my floors with wet wipes. I've got a wet wipe for the windows. I've got wet wipes for tables, for wood.
Boys, I'm not having any of this.
Point being is that you watch this documentary and then you actually realise, well, what are you doing here? Because so they had a test, and they tested one of the leading manufacturers of wet wipes. Turns out one wet wipe is 84% plastic. All of a sudden, does that not make you think, well, wait a second?
And actually, you can do without them, because I have not been using wet wipes since I found all this out. I won't use them.
What do you use as an alternative?
Well, disposable kitchen towels.
Which you probably use more of, potentially.
Yeah, but they're biodegradable.
Well,
they don't cause any harm.
Okay, then. Thank you very much. Bring the class to order here, because we need to move on. We've got another very important subject, and we could be talking about this one for a while. So I'm going to hand over to, and if anybody who's listening wants to comment, please do email us at info@realagendaradio.org. But anyway, I want to move now on to Oliver. You've got something very important that you wanted to highlight this week.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, I want to pose a question around whether corporations can be a force for good. And why it comes up now in my mind, it's partly because I saw a play recently called the Lehman Trilogy, which basically tells the story of Lehman Brothers, the investment bank that was brought down by the financial crisis. And it spans sort of 150 years of one family, or three brothers in particular, who set up a bank, who were immigrants from Germany, came to America to make their fortune. And I think two reasons why it's very interesting to me is, one, it charts, I guess, the evolution of Western capitalism from being something very good, which has transformed into something potentially quite damaging to our society and sort of where we stand today. But also, it also highlighted, I guess, the effects of deregulation on the industry and the resultant effects of that. And so for me, it's about capitalism, corporations can be a force of good, but they have to be kept in check by checks and balances, essentially. Okay, I'm going to plug a book. It's called The Third Pillar. I haven't read this book. I've read the reviews. It's basically by a guy called Raghuram Rajan, who's an economist, and he focuses on the social and economic consequences of globalization and their ultimate effects on politics and society. And he basically is saying governments, society, communities, and corporations need to work together very strongly in order to create a more balanced, fair society, which in itself is nothing new.
We did a feature, an episode the other day about businesses behaving badly. And one of the issues there was businesses paying their tax. But there's loads of things that businesses could be a force for good. And a lot of businesses have found if they are more socially responsible, it's actually better for business and it's better for their workforce. Not just the financial benefits,
Absolutely.
It's the people. And we featured some of these things in the past, and we will again because it's very important. And to me, one of the key things of how business can be a force for good is it pays people decent wages. But that's so important. And obviously that they pay their taxes fairly, and that they look after the workforce, because it's the people that make a business. Anyone else got anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think I've been looking at this report, as I said earlier, from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and we've got over 14 million people in this country who live in poverty. Business and government working together can solve the problem. In this report, they've actually put together a strategy which talks about the sorts of things that business can do to help this situation, to train people properly, to spend time, effort and money on their employees, actually to help them to grow their skills, to make them more employable in different jobs and to get up that ladder. And business can do that.
And then it's also the profits that a business make, because everybody in a business creates the wealth, and that wealth needs to be shared better amongst those that help create it. And it's not just those working in it, it's those in the community as well, because we have to pay for the public services that make business, or the infrastructure and things that make businesses work well. So, and another thing, it does come back to what we were talking before, businesses and their polluting habits. We're not just talking about chemical industries tipping stuff into rivers, but we are talking about lots of other things, and we need to review how they're using the energy as well, the renewable energy aspect. So there's certainly a lot of business could then be a force for good and can make other things happen.
About the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm not sure if they're enforceable, but they're guidelines for corporations in order to do their part in terms of sustainability. And I think they're quite comprehensive, and I think companies should be penalised if they fall short of them, but I can't say what the sort of extent of that is.
And to come back with the idea of regulation, on my side, my opinion is that it's the only way to make those companies do something good. Free market breed on a competition, eternal growing. That is, well, first, it's mathematically not possible to grow eternally on a limited space, and we are far from reaching the star. So we have to consider that, and this is related to our consumption of energy, and it is related to pollution, and it is related to empowerment of population, because once you grow enough and the pie reaches maximum size, so we need to be ready to the fact that the cake is not going to get bigger soon, and splitting this cake equally will be, for me, the secret if we want to maintain social peace.
Yeah, for me, I just think it all goes back to what we do with our population. As you've already said, Julien, it's like, according to the report, we have over 5 million people in the UK lack basic literacy and numeracy skills. We have over 12 million people who lack basic digital skills. Now, in this day and age, if we are going to have growth in the economy, if we're going to grow as a people, actually we need to really educate all of our population. The government has a big role to play in that, to support business, to help to do that, but business also has a responsibility.
And just to add to that, you mentioned about technology, because that's quite an interesting one, because some say that actually, the rise of technology has actually led to parts of the increase in inequality. And then the example of Uber, I think we were discussing before offline, is a case in point. Again, it comes back to sort of, I guess, more regulation in terms of the government giving guidelines for them and regulations. So I think that's a very good point, actually.
Okay, so one of the ways that we talked about regulation of business. One of the ways we can actually incentivize business to do the right thing is actually through the tax system. So we tax things that we don't want people to do, and we untax or reduce taxes or don't tax the things that we do want them to do. So there's an example with renewable energy, electric vehicles, then we can adjust that through the tax system.
So Tom, I suspect you're not going to be supporting our Jeremy Hunt then in his quest to reduce taxes if he becomes Prime Minister.
Absolutely not. But if you want to get onto taxes again, it depends who's paying the taxes. So I'm in favour of increasing taxes on the wealthy and reducing it for those that haven't got enough money to live on.
Actually, just on the taxes, because there's another report actually I was reading from the Commission on Economic Justice on prosperity and justice, and one of the recommendations to sort of around equality, it says we should give tax breaks to sort of middle class stroke people, higher income earners who send their kids to schools in underprivileged areas. What do you think of that then?
It's interesting actually, because I think the whole report that report that you referred to is quite interesting. That sounds a bit sort of fiddling around with things in my view, but yeah. I'd rather make sure put the effort into making sure the schools are good and other things like that.
Absolutely.
I think there's so much, in terms of the government, even on the sustainability stuff that we've been talking about, on this, the poverty stuff, the government is just too laid back. We know what we can do. There are reports like this that tell us what we can do to solve it, but actually, where is the political will to do it? And I don't think there is the political will to actually resolve these issues.
And that's what we've got to change, Satya, isn't it? The political
Absolutely.
will. Okay, that's nearly the end of the show. Anybody else got any last comments?
Well, I do.
I know. Oh, go on.
I do. So this
go on
report,
then, Satya. You're the last call.
I would like people to go and have a look at this report. It's called "We Can Solve Poverty in the UK." It's by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. I'd like people to go and have a look, have a read. It's a very easy read, actually, and get involved, because everybody can do something to make a change and have your voices heard.
Thanks very much, Satya. Well, that's the show for this week. We hope you've enjoyed it and that we have helped to inform, involve and inspire you into action. Now, you can email us at info@realagendaradio.org, or you can contact us via our website, realagendaradio.org. And a special thanks to our sponsors, the Reverse Media Group, one of the fastest growing search and media companies. Find out why at reversemediagroup.com. One thing is certain. People want to see change to a more compassionate and just society, as well as a more courageous politicians prepared to do the right thing for people over party. It's urgent, and it's up to us to make it happen. That's The Real Agenda. I'm Tom Burgess. And
I'm Satya Kartara.
I'm Hugh Clark.
I'm Oliver Williams.
And I'm Julien Camps.
Okay, thank you. Wake up, everybody. Okay, biscuit time now then. So yes, that's The Real Agenda. Thanks very much indeed for listening, and we look forward to talking to you all again soon.